finishing my ice cream. And moving my dog. It's been a relatively long day. I don't know what it is, but my allergies are fucking awful. I'm going to start off with some scary stories on the Lappy Lappy Top. And then I've got some new books today. I actually got 3 books, but my youngest took the one with the skinwalker stories in it. And I can't fucking breathe. So if you hear me over here wheezing, it's because I can't fucking breathe. So I already apologize. I don't want animated. Give me 2 more minutes. Here we go.
That evening, we all gathered around the campfire, passing around snacks and trading random jokes, when my friend settled in across from me. Normally, he was one of the livelier folks, always laughing, always ready with a comeback. But that night, his face looked drawn, and he kept tapping his foot on the dirt like he was working up the nerve to say something. I waited, because whatever had him on edge was no silly ghost story. He started by explaining a bit about his LDS mission, how it covered a broad area, including a reservation that he didn't visit often. Truth be told, none of us were expecting more than a mild anecdote. Then he let slip that this reservation region had an eerie reputation among the locals. We all went quiet, even the ones who'd been whispering or fiddling with their phones. Something about his tone felt heavier than any cheap campfire tale. He cleared his throat and told us about a day he and his companion had to travel far out of their normal route. They met some new investigators who wanted to learn about the faith, and that part went smoothly. The real trouble started after, when they discovered they were nearly out of gas. Nobody was around to help, so they sat there in a stretch of nothingness until someone finally came by with a spare can of fuel. By the time they were on the road again, the sky was dark and the roads were almost deserted. He paused to stare into the flames, recalling every detail. It was late, and his companion had fallen asleep in the passenger seat. My friend had one goal: get them both home as fast as possible. He even admitted to pushing the speed limit. He figured the biggest worry was wildlife or a stray deer darting across his path. But that changed fast. He said that while driving along these unfamiliar back roads, he kept spotting movement in the edges of the headlights. At first, he brushed it off, probably coyotes, maybe a raccoon. Then something shifted right next to his window, much closer than he expected. He glanced down, thinking he would see an animal scurrying by. Instead, he slammed on the brakes, practically launching his companion forward against the dashboard. His companion jolted awake with a startled shout.
We're gonna do some scary stories here in just a second. I went by the library and got us some books. I had a third book but my youngest stole it before I could get through the description. And so we'll have to wait until he's done with it. It's about skinwalkers and wendigos and um, basically a bunch of cryptid stories, like short stories. But I'm reading this stuff. Here is, I got the Oxford Book of English Ghost Stories and The Gathering Dark. So, let me look at these stories. Let me see how long this story is. It's quite a few pages long. So, which one do you want to read? Let me look at this one and see if the stories in this one are any shorter. The Phantom Coach one looks pretty good. You want to start with The Phantom Coach? You can start with that one. I'm gonna have to hold it up to my face so I can read it, but you guys can look at the art while I'm reading. And we'll read this story and then we'll do some art. The Phantom Coach by Amelia Edwards. The circumstances I am about to relate to you have truth to recommend them. They happened to myself, and my recollection of them is vivid as if they had taken place only yesterday. "20 years, however, have gone by since that night. During those 20 years, I have told the story to but one other person. I tell it now with reluctance, which I find it difficult to overcome. All I entreat, meanwhile, is that you will abstain from forcing your own conclusions upon me. I want nothing explained away. I desire no arguments. My mind on this subject is quite made up, and having the testimony of my own sense to rely on, I prefer to abide by it." Oh, it was Never Whistle at Night was the name of the one little man stole. And it was a book of short stories about wendigos and skinwalkers. He saw the giant skinwalker on the front cover and he yanked it out of my hand before I could finish reading the description. I may need to do this when I am not so congested. I desire no arguments. My mind on this subject is quite made up, and having the testimony of my own senses to rely upon, I prefer to abide by it. Well, it was just 20 years ago, and within a day or two of the end of the grouse season, I had been out all day with my gun and had had no sport to speak of. The wind was due east, the month December, the place a bleak wide moor on the far north of England, and I had lost my way. It was not a pleasant place in which to lose one's way, with the first feathery flakes of the coming snowstorm just flittering down upon the heather, and the laden evening closing in all around. I shaded my eyes with my hand and I stared anxiously into the gathering darkness, where the purple moorland melted into the range of low hills, some 10 or 12 miles distant. Not the faintest smoke wreath, not the tiniest cultivated patch, or fence, or sheep track met my eyes in any direction. There was nothing for it but to walk on and take my chance of finding what shelter I could by the way. So I shouldered my pew pew and I pushed wearily forward, for I had been on foot since an hour after daybreak and had eaten nothing since breakfast. Meanwhile, the snow began to come down with an ominous steadiness, and the wind fell after this. The cold became more intense, and the night came rapidly up. As for me, my prospects darkened with the darkening sky, and my heart grew heavy as I thought how my young wife was already watching for me through the window of our little inn parlor, and thought of all the suffering in store for her throughout this weary night. We had been married 4 months, and having spent our autumn in the Highlands, we were now lodging in the remote little village situated just on the verge of the great English moorlands. We were very much in love, and of course very happy. This morning, when we parted, she had imparted to me to return before dusk, and I had promised her I would. What would I not have given to keep my word? Even now, weary as I was, I felt that with supper, an hour's rest, and a guide, I might still get back to her before midnight. If only guide and shelter could be found. And all this time the snow fell and the night thickened. I stopped and shouted out every now and then, but my shouts seemed only to make the silence deeper. Then the vague sense of uneasiness came upon me, and I began to remember stories of travelers who had walked on in these falling snow until wearied out. They were fain to lie down and sleep their lives away. Would it be possible, I asked myself, to keep on this thus through all the long dark night? Would there not come a time when my limbs must fail and my resolution give way? When I too must sleep and sleep of death? Death, I shuddered. How hard to die just now, when life lay all so bright before me. How hard for my darling, whose whole loving heart. But that thought was not to be borne. I banished it. I shouted again, louder and longer, and then listened eagerly. Was my shout answered, or did I only fancy that I heard a far off cry? I hallooed again and again, and the echo followed. Then a wavering speck of light comes suddenly out of the dark, shifting and disappearing, growing momentarily nearer and brighter. Running towards it at full speed, I found myself, to my great joy, face to face with an old man in a lantern. Thank God, was the explanation that burst involuntarily from my lips. Blinking and frowning, he lifted his lantern and peered at my face. What for? Growled he, sulkily. Well, for you. I began to fear I should be lost in this snow. Then folks do get cast away hereabouts from time to time. And what's to hinder you from being cast away likewise, if the Lord so minded? If the Lord is so minded that you and I shall be lost together, friend, we mustn't submit, I replied. But I don't mean to be lost without you. How far am I now from Welding? A good 20 miles or more or less. And the nearest village is Wake and Old, and that's 12 mile to other side. Where do you live then? Out yonder, he said with a vague jerk of the lantern. You're going home, I presume. He says, maybe I am. Then I'm going with you. The old man shook his head and rubbed his nose reflectively with the handle of the lantern. It ain't no use, growled he. He won't let you in, not he. We'll see about that, I replied briskly. Who's he? The master. Who's the master? That's not to you, was the unceremonious reply. Well, well, you lead the way, and I'll engage that master and shall give me shelter and a supper tonight. You can try him, muttered the reluctant guide, and still shaking his head, he hobbled, gnome-like, away through the falling snow. A large mass loomed up presently out of the darkness, and a huge dog rushed out, barking furiously. Is this the house? I asked. It's the house. Down, boy. And he fumbled in his pocket for the key. I drew up close behind him, prepared to lose no chance of entrance, and I saw in the little circle of light shed by the lantern that the door was heavily studded with iron nails, like the door of a prison. In another minute he'd had turned the key, and I'd pushed past him into the house. Once inside, I looked around with curiosity and found myself in a great raftered hall, which served apparently a variety of uses. One end was piled to the roof with corn, like a barn, the other stored with flour sacks, agricultural implements, casks, and all kinds of miscellaneous lumber. While from the beams overhead hung rows of hams, fitches, and bunches of dried herbs for winter use. In the center of the floor stood some huge object, gauntly dressed in a dingy wrapping cloth, and reaching halfway to the rafters. Lifting the corner of its glass, I saw, to my surprise, a telescope of very considerable size, mounted on a rude movable platform with four small wheels. The tube was made of painted wood, bound round with bands of metal rudely fashioned. The speculum, so far as I could estimate its size in the dim light, measured at least 15 inches in diameter. While I was yet examining the instrument and asking myself whether it was not the work of some self taught optician, a bell rang sharply. "That's for you," said my guide, with a malicious grin. "Yonder his room." He pointed to a low black door on the opposite side of the hall. I crossed over, rapped somewhat loudly, and went in. Without waiting for invitation, a huge white-haired old man rose from the table covered with books and papers and confronted me sternly. "Who are you, and how came you here? What do you want?" Yeah, I do need a mic, but I'm getting winded. My sinuses are like all kinds of fucked up. I will finish that a little later maybe. But right now I'm gonna I'm gonna do some coloring.
Demanding an explanation. All my friend could manage was, "Pray, right now." He wouldn't, or maybe couldn't, say why just yet. Instead, he forced the car forward again, driving the rest of the way in tight-lipped silence. His companion kept pestering him, but my friend stayed locked on the road, acting like if he spoke, something worse might happen. He made it back to their apartment complex with nerves in shreds. Once they were parked, his companion cornered him. That's when everything poured out. He had glanced down to see several figures, human in shape but sprinting on all fours, running right beside the car, somehow matching his speed at 40 miles an hour. He insisted he wasn't joking. They weren't animals or some optical illusion, though part of him wished that's all it had been. We were all dead silent around the fire. The only sound was the pop and crackle of burning wood. That image, 6 or so people galloping alongside a moving vehicle, was too bizarre to dismiss. I almost expected someone to laugh and call it a prank, but no one did. The look on his face told us he was dead serious. He went on to say that this was only the start. Even after that night, he couldn't shake the memory. It hovered in his mind every time he drove those roads again, and apparently, future visits to the reservation area would bring more encounters. But he saved those parts for later. At that point, he was wrapping up what he called the late night detour. I don't think anyone blinked until he stopped talking. Eventually, somebody tossed more wood on the fire, but the mood around it had changed. We all felt it, an uneasy sense that maybe there are things out there best left unexplained. The night grew quieter, and we sat there a long time, wishing we could forget the image of those shapes pounding the pavement on all fours, keeping perfect pace. I got transferred to a small town near the reservation, and the thought of going back to that area put me on edge, but an assignment was an assignment. My new companion and I drove out to this old trailer where we'd be bunking for a few nights. The place sat on a lonely stretch of land, with a single flickering streetlight that barely cut through the dark. I kept telling myself it'd be fine, just a couple nights, then we'd move on. Still, my nerves were shot. Our first evening, we turned in early. The wind whistled against the trailer walls, and the place rattled like it hadn't seen a repairman in years. I tried to close my eyes and let the hum of the old heater lull me to sleep, but at around 2 in the morning, a knock erupted from the front door. Not a polite knock either, more like a steady, insistent thumping. My companion and I both bolted upright. We figured maybe a local needed help, so I flicked on the porch light and opened the door just a crack. Nobody, absolutely no one was there. I stepped out, scanning the immediate area, but the single streetlight couldn't push back all the darkness. My companion stood behind me, looking spooked, and we decided whoever it was must have run off. We went back inside, locked up, and tried to settle down again. Minutes later, the knocks returned, this time from the far side of the trailer. Something about it felt wrong, rhythmic, almost like it was playing a game with us. I crept around to the living area window. I peered out, half expecting a coyote or stray dog. But the shapes I glimpsed moving beyond the trailer were taller, standing upright at times, then dropping to all fours. My heart hammered as I thought of the night I'd seen those figures keeping pace with my car. It was like they'd found me again. The rest of the night was miserable. We barricaded the door and kept every light on. In the morning, the sun revealed footprints in the dirt circling the trailer, some clearly human, others spaced oddly
Like a recorder? That might be an idea. I can't fucking breathe. Yeah, that could work. Probably. I mean, like I could pre record it and then play it like a little handheld type deal. Or I could just pre record me reading and play it while I color. Can't fucking breathe. It's either sinuses or I'm getting sick. I'm really, really hoping it's the sinuses. Because I don't want to get sick right now. The last thing I need is a freaking upper respiratory fucking infection. I'm gonna go blow my nose.
the person had been crawling on hands and feet. Neither of us knew what to make of it, but we decided not to linger any longer than necessary. A few days later, we had to drive a local church member home. She lived near another patch of forest on the outskirts of the reservation. My companion and I exchanged worried looks when we realized how remote it was. But we had a job to do, so we piled in the car and took off. The woman sat in the back seat, chatting cheerily to pass the time, and I tried to focus on the conversation instead of staring into the woods. Even so, I caught shapes flitting between the trees in my peripheral vision. At one point, the woman fell silent. She leaned forward, touched my shoulder, and told me to slow down. Her voice was hushed, like she didn't want whatever was out there to hear. Confused, I eased off the gas. Then she pointed through the window, and I spotted something dark and human-shaped crouched between two thick tree trunks, watching us. Its limbs seemed elongated, or bent at awkward angles. We pulled over, uncertain whether to drive away or see if someone needed help. The woman started whispering about local legends, stories of entities roaming these woods, blending between worlds. My companion looked at me, jaw tight, clearly recalling the knocks from the other night. Before any of us could decide what to do, that shape melted back into the darkness. The woman clutched the seat and said, "Please, just go." She sounded terrified, like she'd seen this before and knew it was dangerous. We dropped her off a little while later, and she thanked us but refused to elaborate further. When we got out to stretch our legs, I noticed fresh dirt smeared across the back door and trunk, shapes almost like handprints with fingers too long to be normal. My mind raced back to the figures outside the trailer. Were they stalking us now? My final few nights in that region, I visited a family who insisted I stay over because of an incoming storm. Their house was a bit sturdier than the trailer, so I thought maybe I'd feel safer. My companion and I each took a spare cot in a small guest room. The storm rolled in with gusty winds and flashes of lightning that gave me a headache every time they lit up the window. Close to midnight, a shrill whistle broke the quiet. It started low and rose in pitch, stopping abruptly, only to start again a few seconds later, like someone out there was calling out in a strange, repeating pattern. I sat up and my companion mumbled, "Should we check that?" Every instinct told me no, but something about the whistle seemed urgent. Maybe someone was in trouble. The two of us headed to the back door. The moment I opened it, the whistling ceased. In that split second of silence, I heard movement near the half-broken fence. Bolts of lightning flared across the sky, revealing a silhouette crouched in the mud. It moved slowly along the fence line, then darted away when the next lightning strike came. My companion and I just stood there, too rattled to speak. We hurried back inside, locked everything, and spent the rest of the storm listening for more whistles. None came. By daylight, we found the fence torn at one corner, wood splintered and claw marks raking across it like something had tried to climb over or tear it down. Our hosts were shaken, saying they'd never seen anything like that. They asked if it had anything to do with the reservation stories they'd heard growing up, but we couldn't get a real answer. All we had were scattered glimpses of figures, like some group or presence that appeared whenever we got too close to the reservation at night. Or maybe they were following us, drawn by something we'd done or seen. I left that small town feeling more uneasy than ever, like the land itself held secrets we weren't equipped to understand. And every so often I still wonder whether those knocks, that shadow, and that eerie whistle were connected to the shapes I first saw running beside my car, practically defying all logic. If so, then we'd only seen the tip of whatever lurked in that dark stretch of forest. The final stretch of my mission came quicker than I expected, and part of me was relieved. The higher-ups asked me to revisit one last family living near the reservation boundary, someone who needed a final lesson and blessing. The thought of returning so close to that place rattled my nerves, but I kept telling myself it was only for a few hours. Then I'd be clear of it. I packed up the car, tossed in my notes and some water, and tried to ignore the knot in my stomach. When we arrived, dusk was already claiming the sky. The family was friendly, though they looked a bit uneasy about my presence. They told me of nearby farmers finding livestock missing or mauled, and how strange noises had kept them awake for days on end. Their stories mirrored everything that had happened to me. Footsteps in the dark, shapes racing through the fields, and something out there that felt almost sentient. Regardless, I stayed focused on my purpose. I prayed with them, offered what comfort I could, and prepared to head out before the worst of the night set in. My new companion insisted we drive straight through, no stops, no detours. We stuck to the plan, but somewhere between the family's house and the main highway, we plunged into a long, narrow road that wound through a forested hollow. The headlights created jumping shadows that didn't look quite natural. My hands were shaking on the wheel, so I forced myself to breathe steady. As we rounded a bend, the radio cut out, replaced by static. That's when the shapes appeared. There were at least 3 silhouettes loping along the side of the road, more fluid than any normal stride. Even at a solid clip, they seemed to keep up easily. My companion whispered a prayer, voice trembling. I gave the engine more gas, hoping distance might scare them off, but they only drew closer. One of them, hunched low, launched itself into the path of the headlights, like it wanted to force us to stop. Its eyes shone unnaturally bright. For a split second, I locked eyes with it, a moment so overwhelming that I nearly slammed on the brakes. Somehow, I felt a surge of determination. Maybe it was months of dealing with these encounters, or maybe it was the faith I'd been pouring into every prayer. Instead of stopping, I hit the gas. The figure jerked back, almost as though it couldn't withstand that direct challenge. We roared past and gained speed on the open road. Behind us, the shapes scattered into the tree line, slipping out of the headlights' reach. My heart thundered, but relief washed through me. We'd made it past without letting them trap us. When we merged onto the main highway, the tension broke. I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see those figures sprinting along the shoulder, but there was only empty asphalt. My companion looked pale, eyes darting from side to side, though his shoulders slowly relaxed. After we finally made it back to our apartment, we sat in silence for a while, replaying every instant of that drive. Neither of us knew exactly what we'd encountered, but we'd stood our ground and come out on the other side. In the following weeks, I finished my mission and returned home. A sense of relief settled over me, though I still caught myself scanning dark roads whenever I drove at night. Eventually, I shared the entire story around a campfire with some close friends. Telling it felt like a final exhale, like I was unloading a weight I'd carried far too long. Whether those shapes were people, legends, or something unexplainable, I no longer felt haunted by the question of why they'd shown up or what they wanted. My only hope was that, by speaking of it, I could warn others not to take the back roads so lightly. If you ever find yourself out there under a waning moon, remember to stay alert. Sometimes all it takes is faith, or sheer will, to keep going, and to remind whatever lurks in the darkness that you're no easy prey. I've heard this story from my roommate more times than I'd like to admit, but every time he shares it, my nerves go on high alert. It all started in a Phoenix suburb where he used to do his late night drives, usually around 3 or 4 in the morning. He loves the silence of those roads, the kind of emptiness that feels strangely peaceful, at least it used to. The first encounter sounded almost too bizarre to be real. He was driving along a dimly lit street, empty fields stretching out on the left like a sea of dark silhouettes. Suddenly, a figure on all fours came bolting out of that field. It wasn't a coyote or a stray dog. My roommate swears it had a simian shape, with long limbs that moved way too fast to be normal. Its entire body was this deep black, the kind that almost blends into the shadows. But its face, stark white, like fresh snow. He said it had human features without any expression. The thing sprinted across the road, paused with abrupt precision, and twisted its head to stare straight at him. And just like that, it disappeared into the darkness. He kept driving, not sure if his brain was playing tricks, but he kept replaying that horrifying image of the white mask-like face burned into his memory. A few weeks later, he was on the same stretch of asphalt, this time with a friend in the passenger seat. They were probably talking about random stuff to stay awake when they noticed something crouched in a tree up ahead. At first, it looked like a lump or a bunch of leaves, until it moved. The second they got close, the figure clambered down the tree with inhuman speed. The friends started yelling, convinced they had just seen something completely unnatural. It bounded across the road, spun around, and locked eyes on them again with that cold, white face. My roommate turned the car around in a frenzy, determined to find it, or at least prove it was real. But the roads and fields were silent, no movement, no clue. The friend refused to drive back that way for weeks. That was supposed to be the end of it. 2 freak encounters in the middle of nowhere. But things only got worse. One night, my roommate was coming back from a late shift and decided to avoid that same road, going a longer route instead. Midway through, as he was passing by a fenced-off construction site, he spotted movement in his rearview mirror. Something was in the distance, bounding at an unnatural speed, half hunched over like it was ready to leap. He slammed the brakes, hoping he was just tired and seeing shadows. The figure came closer, its shape illuminated by a flickering streetlight, and it had that same black fur and pale face. He didn't stick around to see more. He floored the gas and took off. When he finally glanced back, the road was empty again. A few days after that, I got a call from him at around 4 in the morning. He was practically yelling into the phone, telling me to get outside immediately with a flashlight. I stepped onto our front yard, bracing for whatever had him so worked up. A minute later, his car screeched up to the curb. He jumped out and said he'd spotted the creature skulking around a block away from our house. We started patrolling the neighborhood, adrenaline driving us to do something that in hindsight might have been a bad idea. After half an hour, we rounded a corner near a small playground. The area was lit by just one street lamp, and we both swear we saw a dark shape perched on top of the swing set, craning its head as if it was surveying the quiet streets. Then, like it sensed our presence, it crouched low and dropped to the ground in a swift, fluid motion. That same ghastly white face appeared for just a heartbeat before it vanished behind a neighboring fence. We ran over, hearts pounding, but found nothing but the faint rustle of the desert breeze. The fifth time it appeared, at least the fifth time he can say for certain, it was near that same open field where the story began. My roommate thought it might be wise to confront his fear head on, so he parked on the shoulder of that lonely road, engine idling, headlights pointed toward the tall grass. He walked out with a powerful flashlight, scanning the dark for any sign of movement. Maybe he hoped the creature wouldn't show, and that he'd be able to tell himself it had all been in his head. But as he swept the light across the field, something moved. A shape rose up, slowly, hunched but distinctly powerful. In the wash of his flashlight beam, he caught that same contrast: black body, white human-like face. And then it sprinted straight for the fence line that bordered the field, leaping over the chain link like it was no obstacle at all. My roommate froze, half thinking he might chase it, but reason kicked in, and he got back in his car and tore out of there. Every time he recounts these episodes, he swears he's wide awake and sober. He talks about the way the creature seems to appear and vanish at will, leaving no trace except the sense of dread that lingers for hours. Every now and then, he wonders if it's some messed up prank or elaborate costume, but nothing explains the way it moves, like gravity barely applies. And that face, so deathly white and human-looking, stays burned into his memory. We've considered setting up night vision cameras or getting more people to stake out the area, but honestly, we're not sure we even want to find out what's lurking out there. My roommate isn't someone prone to flights of fancy, which makes the stories even more chilling. His friend, the one who freaked out in the passenger seat, won't even talk about it anymore. And I'm left wondering if it's only a matter of time before more folks around Phoenix start seeing that same eerie figure crossing roads at impossible speeds, pausing just long enough to make that unnerving eye contact. Because if there's one thing I've learned from hearing his tales, it's that what we don't understand out here in the dark might be a lot closer than we want to believe. I was about 8 or 9 when my family made the annual trip to our Kickapoo homeland in a remote part of Mexico. This was something we did every year, a time when relatives from Oklahoma, Texas, and Kansas all converged on my grandmother Tana's land for important traditions. Tana's property sprawled at the base of a forbidding mountain range that everyone treated with serious caution. People said those mountains could twist your mind if you ventured too far up without the right protections. Anyway, Tana kept 2 small houses on her land. The old house was sealed tight, metal bars over windows that didn't open, steel doors, all to keep out the wandering animals or thieves who might prowl when nobody was around. The new house had the same bars, but you could swing the windows open, which was a luxury in the scorching heat. My mother, Nita, and father, Atohi, set my 2 sisters, Amma and Winona, and me up in the old house, while my Aunt Winona and Uncle Sani took their kids, Hosa and Lona, to the new house. Another set of cousins, Chido and Saya, were also around somewhere on the property, helping with daily tasks, or helping Tana prepare for ceremonies. We were used to the darkness out there, but every time we arrived, it still felt like entering another world. No streetlights for miles, just inky blackness when the sun went down. The only real light might come from our truck's headlights, or maybe a small campfire if we were lucky. Without that, you couldn't see more than a few inches in front of your face. On this particular night, the air was muggy and still. In the old house, the windows were shut tight, so we just tried to fall asleep in that stale heat. After a long day of chores and traveling, we drifted off easily enough. Then, in the middle of the night, we were jolted awake by someone screaming. It turned out to be Hosa, who was 2 years younger than me. He was in the new house, and his voice tore through the silence like an alarm. Groggy and annoyed, I scrambled to a window, only to see my father, normally calm and imposing, rush in and tell us kids to stay put. I remember crossing the dark room, stepping over scattered belongings as I hurried to the barred window. Outside, the moon gave off just enough glow to reveal silhouettes hurrying around with flashlights. My Aunt Winona looked frantic, pointing toward the fence line while my Uncle Sonny and a few older cousins combed the property, scanning the ground for signs of an intruder. They seemed genuinely worried, which made my chest tighten. Why would they be so alarmed if this was just some bad dream? The adults were up until daybreak, but eventually my sisters and I crashed again, too exhausted to stay vigilant. When the sun rose, I cornered Hosa's older brother Lona to see what was going on. He said Hosa had dozed off near an open window in the new house. At some point, something brushed his face. He woke to see an old, pale woman pressing her head between the bars, her long gray hair nearly touching his cheek. She was staring down at him, smiling. Hosa panicked and screamed his head off, sending everyone into a frenzy. I admit I was skeptical. Out there, your mind can play tricks on you in the pitch black darkness. But Lona insisted that Hosa was certain he'd seen a real person. Feeling unsettled, I tracked down another older cousin, Chito, who had scoured the grounds with a flashlight. He told me they'd found footprints by every window on Tana's property, prints that led toward the mountains. Whoever this stranger was, she had circled both houses in total.
I didn't tell you guys, me and the boys rented, a couple of movies, and one of them was pretty new. It was like $10, um, on Amazon, basically. Um, it was actually a really good movie. If you like horror movies. If you don't like horror movies, you probably wouldn't like it. But it was probably one of the best horror movies I've seen this year. Because it was legitimately scary. And then we watched The Monkey. But that wasn't really a scary movie. It was more of a comedy than a real scary movie. It wasn't actually scary. It was more stupid than scary. But the scary movie we watched was Woman in the Yard. Oh, I just messed that one up. I can fix it with some whiteout though. Um, it's called Woman in the Yard, and that movie was terrifying. It scared the crap out of me. I actually jumped and screamed, and then I got made fun of by both of the gremlins. They were like, "Eh, Mom, you scared?" I'm like, "Well, yeah, that was scary." So, yeah, I screamed. They love making me watch scary movies because I will jump and scream. The funniest part about it was that the youngest screamed too, but he blamed me. He said, "Well, I wasn't gonna scream, but you scared me because you screamed." So he basically said he only screamed because I screamed, which isn't true because it scared him too. Damn it. I was not the only one who jumped. I'm just the only one who got made fun of for screaming. But it was a really good movie. I highly recommend it. I thought it was Angela Bassett at first, and it may have been. It looked like her. Shut up, Harry. Listen, I get bullied enough by my youngins. I don't need to come here to get bullied. They bully me enough. You think I'm kidding? I'm not. They bully me. They want to sit there and act like they didn't jump and scream too. Both of them jumped, but little man screamed just as loud as I did. Thank you very much. I just know Shelly's gonna come in here with her smart ass remark.
Darkness, bare feet in the rocky dirt. Just the idea that someone could be roaming out there under that sky, not even stumbling in the dark, made my stomach twist. And that was only the beginning. Later that week, a few of us kids were supposed to gather kindling for a late night fire. My sister Amma and I walked along a narrow trail beside the new house, picking up dried branches. We heard a rustle, like someone trudging through brush just beyond the fence. Amma froze, eyes wide, but I told her it was probably just a stray animal. We didn't see anything, but the air felt charged with tension. We headed back sooner than planned, arms loaded with sticks. That same night, my Aunt Winona swore she caught a glimpse of a figure standing at the fence. She thought it might have been a neighbor dropping by unannounced, but no one answered when she called out. She took a few steps closer and said whoever, or whatever it was, disappeared almost instantly. After that, she refused to let anyone wander off without a companion. The third night, I overheard Tana and my mother speaking quietly. They mentioned that sightings of an old woman had happened before, years back, but those stories never got told to children. It sounded like people had spotted her skulking near windows, muttering in a low voice, or sometimes just standing at the edge of the property, watching from the shadows. According to Tana, those mountains harbored spirits that thrived on fear and isolation. If this woman came from there, it meant something dangerous was drifting down from the peaks onto our land. On the fourth night, a group of us tried to sleep in the old house, feeling weirdly safer with the windows locked. My sister Winona, always the bold one, stayed up reading by lantern light. Around midnight, she said she heard slow scratching noises on the outside wall, like fingernails scraping metal. She snuffed the lantern and pressed herself against the window, trying to see. In the faint moonlight, she thought she caught a shape limping away, a hunched figure with stringy hair that glinted silver. She told me she wanted to run outside to check, but a sudden wave of dread pinned her where she was. By now, people were on edge. Cheeto stayed up through the night, patrolling with a flashlight and an old hunting rifle. Uncle Sanny started lighting protective herbs around the perimeter, a practice some of our elders do to keep negative forces at bay. Tana barely slept, busy guiding a different part of our extended family through their ceremonies during the day, then worrying about the intruder after dark. The final straw came on our last evening there. Another cousin, Saya, was in the new house helping with some cooking when she saw a pale hand grip one of the barred windows for a moment. Saya let out a startled shout, dropped a pot on the ground, and ran to get help. By the time we all rushed in, flashlights sweeping every corner, scanning around the outside, the intruder was gone. But muddy handprints remained on the wall beneath that window, smearing downward as if someone had clung there for a few seconds, watching. In the dawn light, Uncle Sonny found a fresh set of footprints that led away from the new house, through the scrub, and straight up into the foothills. When we followed them a short way, we noticed small patches of disturbed earth, like whoever it was dragged their feet. We didn't dare go farther without a proper ceremony. Tana insisted we leave it alone. She said some places have a hunger for fear, and if you wander in unprepared, you might find exactly what's been feeding on it. We left the property a day earlier than planned. None of us wanted to linger, especially with the children so rattled and the adults tense all the time. On the drive back to the main road, hours of bumpy dirt paths before even seeing a single highway, I sat quietly, replaying everything in my head. It was more than just footprints and a glimpse of someone's face. It felt like the land itself was unsettled, like old energies from the mountains had slithered down to toy with us. Years later, I asked my mother why everyone accepted Hosa's story so readily. She reminded me that these sightings weren't new. Some elders believed a spirit from the mountains took on that old woman's shape and ventured down to peer into windows or creep across fences, targeting families who let their guard down. Knowing we'd found footprints all around both houses made it impossible to dismiss it as a child's nightmare. Even now, I don't love talking about it. I don't go back to Mexico often, and when I do, I stay in Tana's old house with the windows sealed up. Relatives still speak of a pale figure who prowls around occasionally, especially during those large gatherings when people are too occupied to notice who or what might be sneaking around in the dark. Sometimes I catch myself wondering if there's something in the mountains, something that can wear a human face for a night, just to remind us it's still there. The thought alone makes me reluctant to glance out a window after dark, as if I half expect to see that chilling smile right on the other side of the bars. I remember how the house felt too big that evening, despite how cramped it usually was. You'd think having two brothers around would make me feel safer, but it was just us against this uneasy vibe creeping into every corner. Normally, we'd all be at the dinner with the rest of the family, laughing, eating, and celebrating. Instead, we got stuck tending sheep, and the place felt hollow without our parents' voices echoing off those mudstone walls. It started with the dogs outside. They barked in this erratic way, like they couldn't decide if they were afraid or furious. My older brother said it was probably coyotes. My younger brother half agreed, but I caught him staring at the door a bit too long, like he wasn't convinced either. Me, I acted like nothing was wrong, but I was lying to myself. After dinner, we tried to settle down for the night. The idea was to keep things normal. We checked the sheep through the window, found all of them in the pen, then bolted the door. But the dogs wouldn't let up. They'd be quiet 1 second, then start yelping and growling like someone stepped into their territory. I remember pacing the length of the house, from the old wood stove to the window, while my brothers pretended to doze off. My younger brother teased, "Quit being so jumpy," but the flicker in his eyes told me he wasn't feeling calm either. Eventually, I guess I just forced myself to lie down. The rush of silence that followed was almost worse than the barking. It was like a switch had been flipped, and the dogs decided to clam up all at once. My mind raced with possibilities. Maybe the dogs had chased off whatever had them so worked up, or maybe they lost interest and wandered off. But each thought felt incomplete, so I laid there, staring at the low ceiling, my stomach twisting with a kind of dread I couldn't explain. At some point, exhaustion took over, and I drifted into a restless sleep. A while later, I woke up with a start, realizing I needed the outhouse. Of course, there was no way I was going out there alone in the dark. So I nudged my brother awake, and he gave me this smirk that said, "Really? You're scared of the dark like a little kid." If it weren't for my pounding nerves, I might have snapped back at him, but instead, I just told him to bring the flashlight. Stepping outside was like walking into a vacuum. The moon was out, but it wasn't helping my nerves at all. The sheep were still, huddled near the fence, and not a single dog was visible. I could practically taste the tension in the air. We crept toward the outhouse, the flashlight beam darting across the ground and throwing wild shadows on the stone walls. My brother, still grinning at my anxiety, disappeared inside, leaving me standing there, feeling more exposed by the second. That's when the dog started up again, except it wasn't the usual barking. It was furious. I turned toward the sagebrush, my flashlight picking out random shapes, and suddenly one of the dogs made a scream-like noise, something I'd never heard before. A second later, everything cut off again. No howling, no rustling, not even the sound of sheep. My mouth went dry, and I gripped that flashlight like it was my only lifeline. In the sudden hush, I noticed a figure at the truck, leaning casually with an arm propped on the cab. It was too tall to be any normal person, face chalk white under the moon, eyes that burned red even from where I stood. My heart hammered in my chest as I watched it kick one of our dogs, just lashed out, sending the poor thing bolting away. All the others scattered like they'd met the devil himself. Then that figure turned and fixed its gaze on me. For a few agonizing moments, I felt like I was breathing in tar. Everything around me pulsed with a crimson haze, and a nauseating, rotting smell rolled over me. I lost any sense of time. Suddenly, I heard my brother step out, fussing with his belt buckle. The creature shifted its attention to him, giving me just enough of a jolt to realize I wasn't going to let it get to my brother. Something raw and furious took over inside me. I roared, at least that's what I'd call it now, and charged like a half-crazed animal. I saw the thing flinch, the horrific grin melt off its face, and it sprang away into the darkness. We dashed back into the house, slammed the door, and jammed a piece of wood across it. Neither of us spoke, just stood there with our breath rough and uneven, waiting for some sign it was gone for good. But silence was all we got. Eventually, my younger brother collapsed on his sleeping bag in shock, and I found myself perched by the window, fighting the urge to cry, or scream, or both. The night dragged on, lit only by our single lantern, as we tried to convince ourselves that morning would fix everything. I couldn't shake the idea that this wasn't over, not by a long shot. And honestly, I wasn't sure we could handle what was to come if that thing decided to come back for more. But we had no choice. Dawn would either bring answers, or it wouldn't. All I knew was I'd never forget how quickly fear could mutate into that kind of raw, desperate anger, and how the quiet of that night, broken only by a single flashlight's beam, made everything feel way too real. Morning arrived, but the sunlight didn't bring much relief. My brothers and I stumbled around, exhausted, trying to pretend everything was normal. Part of me just wanted to sit and wait for our folks to come back. Instead, we had chores to handle. Our sheep needed tending, and I couldn't help feeling every step outside was a gamble. My older brother kept pacing the front room, eyes flicking to the windows. The younger one hovered near the door, peering through narrow cracks. I busied myself with feeding the few animals we had penned up close to the house. Even that routine felt off somehow. The dogs, normally eager to follow along, stuck under the porch instead, letting out low, uneasy growls whenever.
I've donated before, and I have in the past passed out, like actually fainted. So that's not uncommon. Not as uncommon as you might think. They're all fighting over Stitch's toy. They're farting feathers. Hmm. Yeah, probably. I do believe this shall be my next one. I am going to give her a metallic purple moon. Hmm. I think I'm going to brim her hat in purple too. There is a white one. Hmm.
Wherever I passed. As the day went on, my nerves stayed raw. The memory of that creature's grin and those burning eyes seemed stamped into the back of my mind. None of us wanted to admit we were spooked, but we couldn't hide how jumpy we were. At one point, a board creaked under our feet, and my younger brother dropped a tin bowl, the clang echoing through the house like a warning. Eventually, we realized we couldn't just hunker down forever. We needed to check the sheep and see if anything had happened overnight. I slung a water jug over my shoulder, my brothers grabbed their own gear, and we trudged out into the yard. The dogs didn't join us. Out back, the first thing we spotted were footprints. They were huge and oddly shaped, pressed deep into the ground as if someone heavy or something had passed through. Some looked smeared, like it dragged its feet or maybe moved on all fours. We stood there, heart pounding, exchanging uneasy glances. Part of me wished they were just boot prints from a random trespasser, but they were spaced too far apart for that. I heard a soft whistle from my brother, and he pointed at the corral fence. A piece of wood was splintered near the top, which would take a ridiculous amount of force. My older brother started muttering that we had to do something, but the younger one shook his head. What are we going to do? Chase it? We both knew that wasn't happening. By midday, the sky was a glaring blue, yet the tension still felt thick. My older brother decided we should look in on the flock. A couple of sheep were missing. Probably just strayed, I told myself. We couldn't risk losing them, though, so we set off across the dusty yard, heading for the low hills where they usually wandered. The path out there was marked by scattered sagebrush and rough rocks. Our best dog, the one that usually helped us herd, followed at a distance. We called to it, but it refused to come any closer. My older brother got frustrated, but we both knew the dog wasn't spooked without a reason. We finally spotted the missing sheep along a shallow ravine, huddled by a scraggly bush. As we approached, movement caught my eye. There was a shape leaning into the shadows, almost blending with the landscape. When it turned, I recognized that same pale face, though the daylight made it look even more unnatural. Black lines ran across its features, and the grin twisted into something worse than a smirk. My younger brother shouted. The creature suddenly stretched tall, moving its arms and legs at angles that defied reason. The sheep bawled in fear, stumbling away. I stood there, heart in my throat, as it looked directly at us. My older brother grabbed a rock, hurling it in desperation. The thing jerked aside and vanished in a blink, slinking behind a ridge. By the time we got closer, it was long gone, but it left behind two trembling sheep, each bearing deep scratches like claws had raked them. We rushed the wounded animals back home, trying not to jostle them too much. Blood spotted the ground. With each step, I glanced over my shoulder, convinced that figure might appear again. It felt like we were trespassing on territory we had no business being in, even though this land was ours. Back at the house, we patched the sheep as best as three kids could manage. The sun started dipping, painting the sky in gold and purple streaks. Normally, sundown would be a relief after a day of work. Now it just felt like a countdown. If we could encounter that thing in broad daylight, who knew what nightfall would bring? By the time darkness crept in, we had the windows blocked with old blankets and anything else we could find. The dogs finally ventured inside, trembling and refusing to leave our sides. My brothers and I huddled around a single lamp, the glow barely cutting through the room's corners. We took turns checking outside, pressing our faces to the glass. Every time we looked, we braced ourselves for a glimpse of that pale face. Hours passed with no clear sign. At some point, the silence seemed heavier than anything else. Each of us was waiting for the next horror to show up, trying to hold on to some slim hope our folks would return soon. I remember how the night air slipped through the cracks in the walls, carrying a chill that settled into my bones. I hated feeling helpless, but I also couldn't deny how real our situation was. After what we saw out in the corral, those footprints, the shredded fence, those scratches on the sheep, I had no illusions anymore. Something was hunting around our place, prowling in the daylight and using the night as a cloak. And as we sat, lantern flickering, I began to sense we'd only glimpsed a fraction of what it was capable of. Night came again, and we felt the weight of it pressing down on the house like a heavy blanket. Earlier that afternoon, my brothers and I had sworn we weren't stepping outside until our family got back. None of us could shake the dread crawling inside our heads, especially after seeing that thing slithering around the sheep in broad daylight. Now the sun was gone, and the shadows outside seemed alive. We double-checked the locks on every door and window. My older brother managed to find a couple of makeshift weapons, an old crowbar, a heavy iron rod, and put them by the entrance. None of us had any clue if they'd actually work against something so unnatural, but it was better than feeling totally helpless. The dogs pressed themselves into one corner of the living room, whining softly. Tails tucked so tight they might as well have been invisible. Time dragged. Every few seconds, one of us would sneak a peek outside, parting the curtain by just an inch, bracing ourselves for a pale face leering back. But for a while, nothing stirred. A whisper of hope crept in. Maybe our parents would show up soon, headlights sweeping the yard, and we'd be able to bolt out of here. But that hope felt flimsy at best. A gust of wind rattled the walls. For a heartbeat, we all froze. Then it went quiet again. The hush in the house was worse than the barking dogs from the night before. At least barking let us know they were trying to warn us. This silence. It felt like the moment before a predator strikes. When it finally happened, it started with a dull thump against the front door. My youngest brother jerked around, eyes wide, and my older brother grabbed the crowbar, motioning for us to stay back. The dogs whimpered but didn't bark, a bad sign. If they were too afraid to make noise, we knew we were in serious trouble. Then came scraping sounds, slow and deliberate, like something was testing the integrity of the wood. My heart pounded so hard I thought I'd pass out. My older brother crept forward and peeked through a tiny crack near the doorframe. He gasped, stumbling back. I moved in to take a look. Outside, pressed against our door, was that tall silhouette. Even through the gap I could make out a faint glow of red eyes, scanning around like it could sense exactly where we stood. For a moment, none of us could move. The handle jiggled, and I heard what sounded like a low hiss. The dogs crowded even closer into the corner, ears pinned back. We were running out of time. If it kept banging like that, the door wasn't going to hold. My older brother raised the crowbar, gripping it so hard his knuckles went white. I grabbed the iron rod, my fingers trembling. If this thing came in, we'd have to fight. And judging by our last encounters, brute force might barely slow it down. Still, we had no other option. Just when I thought we'd have to launch ourselves at that door, headlights blazed across the yard. A roar of engines cut through the silence. Relief and terror slammed into me at once. Our parents and maybe some other relatives must have returned. But would that thing go after them? The scraping stopped. My younger brother darted to the window, letting out a shaky breath. "They're here," he whispered, like he could hardly believe it. I tugged the door open a crack, shouting for Mom and Dad. They shouted back, voices echoing off the house. I could almost feel the tension lift, until I glanced back and saw that silhouette at the edge of our porch. Tall, gangly limbs, white face catching the glare of the headlights. My dad stepped out of the car, eyes fixed on the figure, while my mom let out a cry of alarm. I didn't think. I couldn't. I just rushed forward, iron rod in hand, fear and anger swirling in my gut. My brothers followed, or maybe I just assumed they did. It was too chaotic to be sure. The creature hissed, backing off the step as we swung at it. One wild strike caught the edge of its shoulder, making a sound like metal scraping rock. It recoiled, red eyes flashing, that grotesque grin twisting across its face. That's when my dad came hurtling onto the porch, raising his flashlight like a club. The beam swept across the thing's face, revealing skin the color of ash, lips peeled back in a sneer. My mom was shouting in panic, yelling at us to get back. The dogs finally found their voice and barked like mad, adding to the chaos. We cornered it, but it moved with unnatural speed, twisting away before we could fully box it in. It leapt off the porch and streaked into the yard, disappearing behind the truck. I could hear the crunch of gravel under its feet, then nothing. For a second, I stood there in shock, adrenaline buzzing in my veins. Then I heard my dad shout, "In the car, now!" No one argued. We scrambled off the porch, cramming into the vehicles with barely a glance behind us. The dogs jumped into the back, still barking ferociously. My mom started the engine, tires kicking up dust as we tore down the dirt path. I leaned out the window for one last look, half expecting to see those red eyes peeking through the swirling dust. But all I caught was a flicker of movement near the edge of the property, a tall shape vanishing into darkness. We didn't stop until we were miles away, huddled together in a relative's driveway under flickering porch lights. My mom called a local medicine man, voice shaking.
She was here earlier. Um, she may have went to bed, I don't know. But she was here a little bit ago. I think I'm about to call it. And we can watch some Karens. I was only gonna color for a little while. I was actually gonna read, but I can't breathe good enough to do that tonight. My allergies are too bad. I may have to wait until tomorrow, and I may not be able to do it tomorrow if my allergies don't get better. I'm not feeling too good today. Got a horrible headache. And my allergies are just kicking my ass. Can't fucking breathe. I figured we could watch some Karen freak outs and laugh at idiots. Maybe that'll make me feel better. Oh god, I'm miserable. Ugh. I love you guys. I'll be back. Give me about 5 minutes to switch everything over. I think this picture is going to turn out pretty good though. Alright, see y'all in a minute.